What if I told you that someone planned a murder in plain sight, not in a dark alley, not in a secret meeting, but on a website that anyone with the right software could access? A place where names don't exist, faces don't matter, and money moves like smoke. Impossible to trace, impossible to stop. A place called the dark web. And what if I told you the killer made only one mistake? One single mistake. And that mistake unraveled everything. Welcome to StoryLabs. Tonight, we are going somewhere most people are too afraid to go. Tonight, we follow the digital breadcrumbs of one of the most chilling, most complex, and most deeply human crimes ever committed in the age of the internet. A story about obsession, betrayal, and the terrifying truth that evil doesn't always look the way we expect it to. This is the dark web murder mystery. It began on a Tuesday morning in October 2019. A small town, Clearwater, Minnesota. Population 11,400. The kind of town where everybody knows your name, everybody waves from their porch, and the most exciting thing that usually happens is the high school football team winning a regional championship. Detective Marlo Kane had lived in Clearwater his entire life. 42 years old. Salt and pepper stubble. A coffee mug that had seen better days. He'd handled bar fights, a few burglaries, one domestic incident that still kept him up at night. But murder? Clearwater didn't do murder. Until the morning his phone rang at 5:47 a.m., and the voice on the other end said 8 words that changed everything. We found a body. Behind the Miller property. Kane arrived at the scene 12 minutes later. The fog was thick that morning, rolling in low off the lake like a slow exhale. His boots sank into the frost-stiffened grass as he crossed the field, flashlight cutting through the gray. The body was face down. Male. Mid-30s, maybe. Dark jacket. No wallet. No phone. No ID of any kind. Kane crouched beside the forensics tech, a young woman named Priya Sharma who had transferred from Minneapolis 8 months earlier and still hadn't quite gotten used to the quiet. Cause of death? Kane asked. Priya didn't look up from her kit. Too early to confirm officially, she said. But there's blunt force trauma to the back of the skull. Significant. Whoever did this didn't do it by accident. Kane stood slowly. He scanned the field. The Miller property backed up to a dense tree line, a narrow creek, and an old logging road that hadn't been used in years. No tire tracks. No footprints in the right places. Whoever brought this man here knew exactly what they were doing. Any idea at all? Kane asked. Priya finally looked up. Her expression said everything before her words did. That's the thing, she said. His fingerprints don't exist in any database. No dental records match. No missing persons report matches his description. She paused. Detective Kane, this man doesn't officially exist. Now, I want you to stop for a moment. Because this is where the story gets complicated. This is where most investigators would hit a wall, close a case file, and move on. An unidentified body in a small town with no leads, no motive, no connection to anyone. But Kane? Kane had a habit. A small, almost embarrassing habit he'd never told anyone about. He subscribed to a newsletter. A digital newsletter written by a former FBI cybercrime analyst named Delia Torres. Every 2 weeks, Delia sent out a deep dive into the world of online crime. Dark web marketplaces. Cryptocurrency fraud. Digital identity theft. Kane barely understood half of what she wrote. But he read every word. And 3 weeks before the body showed up behind the Miller property, Delia had written something that lodged itself in the back of Kane's mind like a splinter. She'd written about a new trend emerging in the darkest corners of the internet. Forums where people didn't just talk about crime. They commissioned it. The dark web, for those who don't know, is not some mythical, unreachable underworld. It is simply a part of the internet that isn't indexed by standard search engines. You can't get there by typing an address into your browser. You need specific software. A specific browser called Tor, which bounces your connection through dozens of servers across the globe, making you essentially invisible. And in that invisibility, people's things. Do things. What? Things you wouldn't believe. In 2019, cybercrime analysts estimated that the dark web hosted over 10,000 active criminal forums and marketplaces. Drugs, stolen identities, counterfeit currency, hacked databases containing the personal information of millions of ordinary people. And yes, hire for violence services. Hitman forums. Most of them, law enforcement insisted, were scams. Someone would post an offer, collect cryptocurrency payment, and then disappear. The victim of the scam couldn't exactly report it to the police. But most is not all. Kane called Delia Torres that same evening. She answered on the second ring. "Detective," she said, and her voice had an edge to it that made Kane sit up straighter. "I've been waiting for someone to call me about this." "You know something?" Kane asked. A long pause. "I know that 3 weeks ago," Delia said slowly, "a forum on the dark web called The Arrangement posted a completed contract. The details were vague, but the location, detective, they mentioned a town in Minnesota." Kane felt the air leave his lungs. "I flagged it to the FBI," Delia continued. "They told me it was almost certainly a scam post. Digital bravado. Nothing real." Another pause. "I don't think they were right." Now, here is where the story splits in two directions simultaneously. And this is important because what happened next didn't unfold in one place. It unfolded in parallel, in two completely separate worlds that were about to collide with devastating force. Direction 1. Detective Kane, digging into the identity of a ghost. Direction 2. Someone, somewhere, beginning to panic. Because whatever they thought they had paid for, had just made the news. And news travels fast, even on the dark web. Kane spent the next 48 hours doing something most small-town detectives would never have thought to do. He called in a favor from his cousin Marcus, who worked in cybersecurity for a financial firm in Chicago. Marcus wasn't law enforcement. He had no official clearance. But he knew his way around the darker parts of the internet the way a sailor knows the sea. "I need to find a forum called The Arrangement," Kane told him. Marcus went quiet for a long moment. "Kane," he said finally, "you sure about this?" "Someone is dead in my town," Kane said, "and nobody knows who he is. That's the only thing I'm sure about." Marcus agreed. He would look. He would be careful. And he would call Kane the moment he found anything. In the meantime, forensics came back with something unexpected. The dead man's jacket. A high-end brand. Italian stitching. The kind of jacket that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Inside the lining, sewn carefully into the fabric, forensics had found something small. Something that had clearly been hidden on purpose. A USB drive. Tiny. Barely the size of a thumbnail. But there. Kane stared at it through the evidence bag, and something cold moved through him. This man had known he was in danger. He had hidden something. And now, it was Kane's job to find out what. The digital forensics team at the county level couldn't crack the USB's encryption. It was protected by a password, and not a simple one. 16 characters, mixed case, numbers, symbols. The kind of password a professional uses. Kane sent it to the state lab. The state lab sent it to a federal contact. 3 days later, a woman Kane had never spoken to before called him from a number with a Washington, D.C. area code. "Detective Kane," she said crisply. "My name is Special Agent Renata Voss, FBI Cybercrime Division. I understand you found something interesting." "I found a dead man nobody can identify," Kane said. "We can identify him," Voss said. And the world, as Kane understood it, suddenly got much, much larger. The man behind the Miller property was not from Clearwater, Minnesota. He was not even from the United States. His name was Adrian Colt, British national, 36 years old. And for the past 4 years, according to Agent Voss, he had been working as an undercover operative for Interpol, infiltrating dark web criminal networks across 3 continents. He had been, in the language of intelligence work, deep cover. So deep that almost nobody knew he was there. What was he doing in Clearwater? Kane asked. Voss's answer came slowly, deliberately. He was following a trail, she said. A money trail. Cryptocurrency transactions that originated from someone inside the United States. Someone who had used the arrangement forum to hire a professional. Not to kill a stranger, detective. She paused. To kill someone they knew personally. Kane's grip tightened on the phone. And Colt was killed before he could identify who, Kane said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Voss said. Which means whoever is behind this knew he was coming. Think about that for a moment. An Interpol agent. Years of undercover experience. Operating in the shadows of the darkest corners of the internet. And someone in a small Minnesota town had found him, had identified him, had silenced him. This was not a crime of passion. This was not impulsive, messy, or emotional. This was calculated. And calculated crimes have one terrifying quality above all others. The person who committed them? They are almost certainly someone you would never suspect. Kane went back to basics. Because that is what good detectives do when the world gets too big and too complicated. They go back to what they can see, what they can touch, what is real and physical and in front of them. The Miller property. He drove out there the next morning. Alone. The forensics team was long gone. The crime scene tape still fluttering in the October wind. He walked the perimeter slowly, methodically. Millers were an elderly couple. Retired. Gerald, 71. Evelyn, 68. They'd owned that land for 30 years. Kane had gone to school with their son, Patrick Miller, who had moved to Chicago 8 years ago to work in finance. Kane stopped walking. He stood very still in the frost-hard field. Finance. Cryptocurrency was finance. Dark web transactions required financial knowledge. He told himself it was a stretch. A wild, paranoid leap with no evidence behind it. He told himself that. But he drove back to the station and pulled up everything he could find on Patrick Miller anyway. What he found was nothing alarming on the surface. Patrick was 38 years old. Worked as a senior analyst for a mid-size investment firm. Married. One child. A daughter named Sophie, aged 6. He had a LinkedIn profile, a Facebook page, an Instagram account showing family vacations and charity 5K runs. Normal. Clean. Ordinary. Except for one thing. 11 months earlier, Patrick had filed for divorce. The proceedings were quiet, unreported, the kind of legal paperwork that slides through without anyone noticing. His wife, Clara Miller, had moved back to Clearwater 3 months after filing. Back to her in-laws. Back to the quiet town she had grown up in. And Patrick contested the divorce. He had fought it, bitterly, according to court documents. And buried in those documents, almost invisible between the legal language and procedural filings, was a reference to an allegation. Clara Miller had alleged that her husband had threatened her. Not physically, digitally. She had claimed that someone had hacked her personal accounts, had accessed her private communications, had sent anonymous messages to her friends, her family, her employer. She believed it was Patrick. She couldn't prove it. And now, Clara Miller was living on her in-laws' property. The same property where Adrian Colt's body had been found. Let's take a breath. Because I need you to understand where we are. Detective Kane, a small-town cop in a town that doesn't do murder, is now standing at the intersection of an Interpol investigation, a dark web assassination forum, and a bitter divorce case that may have spiraled into something monstrous. Clara Miller, living on her in-laws' property. The very property where a dead Interpol agent was found in the frost. Coincidence? In detective work, there is a phrase that gets repeated so often it becomes almost meaningless. But that doesn't make it less true. There are no coincidences. Kane knew it. And he also knew something else. Something that made his next move far more delicate than anything he had ever navigated before. If Patrick Miller was responsible for what happened to Adrian Colt, then Patrick Miller had already proven he was willing to do the unthinkable. Which meant that Clara Miller and her 6-year-old daughter, Sophie, were in danger. Right now. Today. In this town. Kane picked up his phone and called Agent Voss. The FBI's response was faster than Kane expected. Within 18 hours of his call, Voss arrived in Clearwater with a 2-person team. No sirens. No press. A single unmarked SUV that parked quietly behind the police station like it belonged there. Voss was not what Kane had pictured. Late 30s. Sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. The kind of stillness that comes not from calm, but from complete, total control. She shook Kane's hand once, looked around the station, and said, "Walk me through everything. From the beginning. Leave nothing out." Kane walked her through it. She listened without interrupting, without writing anything down, which Kane found either impressive or unsettling. He couldn't decide which. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Patrick Miller," she said, almost to herself. "You know the name?" Kane asked. Voss set a folder on his desk. She opened it slowly, like someone revealing a card they've been holding close to their chest for a very long time. Inside was a photograph. Grainy, clearly taken from a distance with a long lens. A man in a suit, walking out of a building in what looked like Chicago's financial district. Kane recognized the face immediately. "Patrick Miller. We've been watching him for 6 months, Voss said. "Not for this. For something else." His firm was flagged in a financial intelligence report for unusual cryptocurrency transactions. Large sums. Moving through mixers, tumblers, and offshore accounts. The kind of movement that usually means one of 3 things. She held up 3 fingers and counted them down. Money laundering. Tax evasion. Or, she left the third one hanging in the air. Kane filled it in. Paying for something illegal. Voss nodded once. "Our financial analyst traced one specific transaction chain," she continued. It took weeks. The cryptocurrency had been bounced through 14 different wallets across 9 countries. But eventually, it led somewhere. She turned to the next page in the folder. It led to a receiving wallet associated with a known dark web facilitator. Someone who acts as a middleman. A broker between clients and service providers. "The arrangement," Kane said. Voss looked at him sharply. "You've done your homework," she said. "I had help," Kane replied. Here is what the FBI had pieced together, and what they shared with Kane over the next 3 hours. Hunched over a table in his small station, while rain began to tap against the windows. The arrangement was not, as most people assumed, a simple forum where criminals posted advertisements. It was far more sophisticated than that. It operated like a corporation. There was a vetting process. A potential client couldn't simply log on and place an order. They had to be referred by an existing member. They had to pass a series of identity verification steps designed not to reveal who they were, but to prove they were serious, that they had funds, that they were not law enforcement. The transactions were structured in stages. A deposit up front, a larger payment upon confirmation of completion. Confirmation of completion. Think about what that means for a moment. There was a system, a way to confirm that the job was done. And Adrian Colt, the Interpol agent, had gotten close enough to that system to start pulling at its threads. Too close. Close enough that someone decided he needed to be removed. The question, Voss said, leaning back in her chair, is who made that call? The client, Patrick Miller, acting on his own initiative? Or the forum's operators, protecting their network? Does it matter? Kane asked. Voss thought about it. It matters, she said, because if the forum's operators ordered the hit on Colt, then Patrick Miller may not even know Colt is dead. He may not know we're onto him, which gives us an advantage. She let that word sit. Advantage. In chess, an advantage is everything. It is the difference between winning and losing, between catching a killer and watching them walk free. Kane understood. So we don't tip him off, Kane said. We don't tip him off, Voss confirmed. And we build the case from the inside. That same evening, Kane drove out to the Miller property, not to the main house, to the small guest cottage at the back of the lot, where Clara Miller had been living for the past 3 months with her daughter. He knocked gently. Clara answered the door in a sweater and jeans, Sophie balanced on her hip, crayon still in the little girl's hand. She looked at Kane the way people in small towns look at their local detective when he shows up unannounced at their door in the evening, like something bad was about to be confirmed. Can I come in? Kane asked. She stepped aside without a word. They sat at a small kitchen table. Sophie was sent to the bedroom with a juice box and a coloring book. And then Clara Miller looked at Kane with eyes that were tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. It's Patrick, isn't it? She said. Not a question. I need to ask you some things, Kane said carefully. And I need you to be completely honest with me. Even if it feels like it doesn't matter. Even if you think it sounds crazy. Clara laughed. A short, hollow sound. Crazy, she repeated. Detective, do you know what it's like to wake up one morning and realize the person sleeping next to you is someone you don't recognize at all? Not because they changed, but because you finally saw them. Kane said nothing. He let the silence do its work. Patrick has money, Clara began slowly. More than his salary should explain. I noticed it about 2 years ago. I didn't say anything at first because you don't. You tell yourself there's an explanation, a bonus, an investment that paid off. You tell yourself the story that makes sense. She wrapped her hands around her coffee mug. But then the behavior started. The secrecy, the locked laptop, the phone that never left his person. And then, she stopped. Then what? Kane prompted gently. Then I found something, she said. On a piece of paper. In the pocket of a jacket he'd left at my parents' house. I wasn't snooping. I was doing laundry. She looked up at Kane. It was an address. And a name. And a number that looked like it could be an account balance. Except the number had too many zeros. Kane kept his voice steady. Even. Do you still have it? Clara stood up. She crossed to the kitchen counter, opened a drawer, and reached beneath a stack of takeout menus. She placed a small folded piece of paper on the table between them. Kane unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was neat, precise. A Chicago address. A name Kane didn't recognize. And a number. $850,000. Kane photographed the note and drove straight back to the station. He called Voss at 9:47 p.m. She answered immediately, as if she hadn't stopped working. He read her the address and the name. There was a pause on her end, long enough that Kane thought the call had dropped. Voss, he said. That address, she said slowly, is a building in Chicago's West Loop. It's a registered consulting firm. Shell company, almost certainly. And that name. Another pause. Detective, that name is one we have seen before. It appears in the financial trail we traced from Patrick Miller's transactions. It's the broker, Kane said. The middleman. We believe so, Voss said. And if Patrick Miller had that name written down, if he had a physical record of that contact, he's either very confident, Kane said, or very careless. Or both, Voss said. Intelligent people make the worst criminals sometimes. They trust their own systems too much. They believe their own invincibility. She paused again. Kane, we need to move faster than I thought. If Miller suspects at all that Colt's death has been linked to him, he'll start destroying evidence. Digital trails, financial records, everything. Then we need something solid. Now, Kane said. We need the USB, Voss said. Whatever Colt was hiding in that jacket lining, that's our key. Our lab has been working on the encryption. And a brief silence. They cracked it an hour ago, Voss said. And detective, you need to see what's on it. Kane was at the Federal Field Office satellite location by 7 a.m. the next morning. A converted office space above a real estate agency. 2 agents he hadn't met before were already stationed at the door. Inside, Voss stood before a laptop screen, arms crossed, expression unreadable. On the screen was a file directory. Dozens of folders, organized meticulously. The work of someone who understood that the evidence they were collecting might one day need to be presented in a court of law. Adrian Colt had been building a case. A comprehensive, devastating case. He'd been tracking the arrangement for 14 months, Voss said quietly. He had transaction records, cryptocurrency wallet addresses, forum screenshots captured before they could be deleted, user behavioral patterns that his analysts had used to narrow down geographic locations. She clicked on a folder labeled Clearwater, Priority. Inside were 5 documents. The first was a transaction record showing a cryptocurrency payment originating from a wallet linked to Patrick Miller's financial accounts. The chain of wallets it passed through was documented step by step. The second was a forum post, a screenshot from the arrangement's private section, accessible only to vetted clients. The post had been made 8 months earlier. The language was coded, deliberately vague, but the intent was unmistakable. A contract. For a woman. In Minnesota. Clara Miller. Kane felt something cold settle in his chest. He hired someone to kill his own wife, he said. To prevent the divorce from going through, Voss said. Our analysts believe it was about money. A prenuptial agreement that Clara's attorneys had identified a flaw in. If she pursued the divorce to completion, Miller stood to lose a significant portion of assets that we now believe were accumulated through financial fraud. So he decided to remove the problem, Kane said. The word tasted wrong in his mouth. Remove. As if Clara Miller were a splinter. It was a forum response to Miller's complaint. From the arrangement's administrators. The message was 3 lines. Your impatience is a liability. Your identity is your problem. The operative you were assigned is no longer available. Do not contact us again. Kane read it twice. They cut him off, he said. They cut him off, Voss confirmed. But by then, Colt had enough to act. He traced Miller's physical location through the forum's metadata, cross-referenced it with Clara Miller's known address through public records, and traveled to Clearwater to make contact with her, to warn her, and to gather the final piece of evidence that would let him hand the entire case to law enforcement. He never made it to her, Kane said. No, Voss said softly. He didn't. Then who killed him? Kane asked. If the arrangement cut Miller off, if the hired operator went dark, who actually? He stopped, because the answer was forming in his mind before Voss could speak it, and it was worse than anything he had imagined. Voss looked at him steadily. We believe Patrick Miller drove to Clearwater himself, she said. We believe he followed Colt. We believe he identified him through the forum's own security breach, the same breach that Colt used to infiltrate their network. The administrators may have warned Miller that an operative was closing in. They had motive too. Self-preservation. So Miller drove to his own parents' property, Kane said slowly, found Colt, and killed him himself. With his own hands, Voss said. No intermediary. No dark web contract. No plausible deniability. She pulled up one final document on the screen. A traffic camera image. Grainy, time-stamped. A vehicle on the county road leading to Clearwater. October 14th, 11:23 p.m. 2 days before the body was found. The vehicle's plates were partially obscured, but the make and model were clear. A dark blue Mercedes sedan. Patrick Miller drove a dark blue Mercedes sedan. This is enough, Kane said. This is enough to bring him in. Almost, Voss said. We need one more thing. We need him to come to us. Because if we go to Chicago to arrest him, his lawyers will have him in a protective bubble before we can blink. We need him here, on our ground. She looked at Kane with an expression that told him exactly where this was going. We need Clara to call him, she said. Kane drove back to the guest cottage in the late afternoon. The autumn light was failing fast, the sky going gray and amber above the tree line. Clara answered the door before he could knock. She had been waiting. She looked at his face and understood immediately that what he had found was serious. Worse than she had feared. Worse than she had let herself imagine in those quiet, terrible hours when Sophie was asleep and the cottage was dark and the truth pressed at the edges of her thoughts like water finding cracks in a wall. "Tell me," she said. He told her. Not everything. Not all of it. But enough. Enough that when he finished, Clara was very still for a very long time. And then she said something Kane didn't expect. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She looked out the window at the field behind the house, and she said, quietly and clearly, "I knew. I didn't let myself know. But I knew." Then she turned back to Kane. "What do you need me to do?" The plan was simple. The simplest plans always are. Clara would call Patrick. She would tell him that she had found something. That she had found papers in the cottage that she didn't understand. That she needed him to come and explain them before she showed them to her lawyer. She would use the language he expected from her. Uncertain. Dependent. The version of Clara he had constructed in his mind over years of marriage. The version that needed him. She would give him a reason to come. And when he arrived, Kane and Voss would be waiting. Clara rehearsed it twice. Kane watched her and said nothing. He had worked with witnesses before, with informants, with people who were frightened and brave in equal measure. But he had never watched someone prepare to face the person who had tried to have them killed. Clara's hands were steady. Her voice was steady. When she picked up the phone and dialed, Kane held his breath. Patrick Miller answered on the second ring. "Clara," he said, and his voice was warm. Practiced. The voice of a man who had learned to perform ordinary emotions the way most people perform them naturally. "Patrick," she said, "I found something. I think I should come." A pause. "What kind of something?" he asked. And his voice, just barely, just at the very edge of what a stranger might catch, sharpened. Clara looked at Kane. Kane nodded. "Papers," she said. "I don't understand them. They have your name on them. And some numbers." Another pause. Longer this time. "I'll come this weekend," Patrick said. "I was hoping sooner," Clara said softly. "I'm nervous, Patrick. I don't know what to do with them." The longest pause yet. Then, "I'll be there tomorrow." The line went dead. Clara set the phone down on the table with the careful precision of someone setting down something fragile. She looked at Kane. "He's coming," she said. Kane nodded. And somewhere beneath the relief, beneath the cold procedural machinery of what came next, the surveillance, the coordination, the careful positioning of an arrest that had to be perfect, somewhere beneath all of that, Kane felt the weight of what this woman in front of him had just done. She had just used her own fear as bait. She had faced the thing that wanted to destroy her, and she had spoken to it in a steady voice. That, Kane thought quietly, was not something he would forget for a long time. There is a specific kind of silence that falls over a place when people are waiting for something inevitable. It is not peaceful. It is not calm. It is the silence of held breath, of hands that want to move but stay still, of eyes that watch every shadow, every shifting light, every sound that might be the sound. Clearwater, Minnesota, October 24th, 2019. Kane had been awake since 3 a.m. Not because he couldn't sleep, but because he had chosen not to. He sat in his car at the edge of the Miller property in the pre-dawn dark, thermos of coffee balanced on his knee, and ran through every possible version of the next 12 hours. Every version in which something went wrong. Voss had positioned her team carefully. 2 agents in an unmarked vehicle on the county road, covering the main approach. 1 agent in the tree line with a clear view of the guest cottage. Kane himself would remain mobile, close enough to respond, far enough not to spook Miller on approach. Clara and Sophie had been moved the previous evening. A quiet exit through the back of the property. A neighbor's car. Sophie clutching a stuffed rabbit and asking where they were going. An adventure, Clara had told her. She'd looked at Kane as she said it, and the word landed differently between the two of them. Not an adventure. A rescue. A woman extracting herself and her daughter from the long shadow of a man who had tried to erase them. The cottage now sat empty. Staged to look occupied. Lights on a timer. A jacket hung over a kitchen chair visible through the window. The trap was set. Now they waited. Patrick Miller's dark blue Mercedes crossed the county line at 11:17 a.m. The agent on the road surveillance team called it in immediately. Kane sat up straight and set down his coffee. "He's alone," he asked into the radio. "Confirmed. Single occupant. Let him through. Do not move until I give the signal." "Copy." Kane watched the long driveway from his position behind a stand of birch trees. The Mercedes moved slowly. Too slowly, maybe. The pace of someone who was thinking, calculating, reassessing even now whether this was the right move. "Come on," Kane thought. "Keep coming." The car stopped. 50 yards from the cottage. It just stopped, engine still running. Sitting there in the flat October light, like a held breath made metal. Kane's hand moved to his radio. Then the driver's door opened. Patrick Miller stepped out. He was exactly as he appeared in his photographs. Well-dressed, composed, the kind of man who walked into rooms and immediately understood the power dynamics within them. Dark coat, neat hair, a face that, if you didn't know what Kane knew, you might describe as handsome. He stood beside the car and looked at the cottage. He didn't move toward it. He just looked. And Kane understood, in that instant, with the clarity that years of reading people had given him, that Patrick Miller was not here to explain anything to his wife. He had never believed Clara's story about the papers. He had come for a different reason entirely. Miller reached back into the car. All units, Kane said quietly into the radio. Move now. Move now. Everything had compressed, electric seconds. The agent in the tree line broke cover. The unmarked vehicle from the county road accelerated up the driveway, gravel spraying. Kane was already running, badge in one hand, the other hand steady and trained. Miller spun around at the sound. His face did something interesting in that moment. Something Kane had seen before in people who were caught in the act of becoming the worst version of themselves. It wasn't fear exactly. It was the collapse of a performance. The mask that had been held so carefully, for so long, simply fell. What was underneath was not a monster. That was the most unsettling part. What was underneath was just a man. Frightened. Cornered. Utterly, completely ordinary. Patrick Miller, said, appearing from the side of the cottage with a composure that Kane would later describe as the most authoritative thing he had ever witnessed. FBI, you are under arrest. Miller said nothing. He looked at Kane, and Kane looked back. It's over, Kane said simply. Miller closed his eyes. And the thing he had built, the architecture of deception and desperation and dark corners of the internet, where money moved like ghosts, all of it, came down. The arrest of Patrick Miller did not make national headlines immediately. These things rarely do, at first. The machinery of justice is slow and deliberate, and deeply unsexy. Arraignments, bail hearings, evidence filings. The careful, painstaking construction of a case that will survive a courtroom. But 3 weeks later, when the charges were formally announced, the story broke. And it broke everywhere. Because it had everything. A quiet small town. A dark web assassination forum. An Interpol agent found dead in a frozen field. A man who had sat at dinner tables and coached Little League and attended neighborhood barbecues, while simultaneously navigating the darkest corners of the internet in an attempt to have his wife killed. The media called it the digital husband case. Kane hated the name. It made it sound almost clever. Almost interesting in the wrong way. There was nothing clever about it. There was nothing interesting about it. There was only Clara Miller, starting over. And Sophie, 6 years old, who would grow up with the knowledge that the world had once moved to protect her, even when she didn't know it needed to. Now, here is what the prosecution built. And it was, by any measure, a remarkable piece of legal architecture. The USB drive from Adrian Colt's jacket lining contained 14 months of documented evidence. Transaction records tracing $850,000 of Patrick Miller's fraudulently obtained funds to the arrangement's receiving wallet. Forum screenshots showing the contract posting, the correspondence, and Miller's increasingly desperate follow-up messages. A recorded audio fragment, captured covertly by Colt during a surveillance operation, of a phone call between Miller and the arrangement's broker, the man whose name had been written on the paper in Clara's cottage. The traffic camera image placing Miller's vehicle near Clearwater on the night of Colt's death. Cell tower data confirming his phone had pinged a tower 6 miles from the Miller property at 11:58 p.m. that same night. And the item recovered from the object Miller had reached for in his car when he stepped out that morning. A burner phone. Prepaid. Unregistered. The kind of phone people buy when they want to communicate without leaving a trace. On it, forensics found deleted messages. Recovered through specialist software. Messages to a number linked to the arrangement's broker. The last message, sent the night before Miller drove to Clearwater, read, "She has something. I'm handling it." 2 words. I'm handling it. The prosecution argued those 2 words told the jury everything they needed to know about the state of Patrick Miller's mind when he made the drive to Clearwater. He had not come to talk. He had not come to explain. He had come to finish what he had tried to pay someone else to do. The defense argued there was no physical evidence directly linking Miller to Colt's death. No weapon. No DNA. No eyewitness. They were right about that. But the jury deliberated for 11 hours. And then they came back. Patrick Miller was convicted on 4 counts. conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, financial crimes related to the fraudulent accumulation of assets, and, most critically, second-degree murder in the death of Adrian Colt. He was sentenced to 41 years in federal prison. He will be 79 years old before he is eligible for parole. In the courtroom, as the sentence was read, Clara Miller sat in the gallery beside her mother-in-law, Evelyn, who had testified for the prosecution with a steadiness that made grown adults in the courtroom look at the floor. Clara did not cry when the verdict came. She had spent, she told a journalist months later, so long being afraid that when the fear finally lifted, she didn't feel joy exactly. She felt air. Just air. Like breathing for the first time in years. Adrian Colt was returned to his family in England. A quiet service. No press. The kind of dignity afforded to those who do dangerous work in the dark so that ordinary people can live safely in the light. He left behind a sister, a mother, and 14 months of meticulous documentation that had survived even his own death to bring justice. Interpol posthumously honored him with their highest commendation. His name, finally, was public. No longer a ghost. The arrangement forum was taken down by a coordinated international law enforcement operation 5 months after Miller's arrest. 43 individuals across 11 countries were charged in connection with the network's operations. The forum's primary administrator was identified through metadata analysis that traced back, improbably, to a single operational security error made 4 years prior. One mistake. Just like Kane had said at the very beginning. One single mistake. In the world of the dark web, operators often say that their anonymity is absolute. That the layers of encryption and rerouted connections and untraceable currency make them invincible. But invincibility is a story people tell themselves. And every story, eventually, has an ending. Detective Marlo Kane retired from the Clearwater Police Department 2 years after the Miller case. He was 44 years old and had seen, in the span of 1 October, more than most small-town detectives see in an entire career. He took a consulting role with a regional task force focused on digital crime. He still drinks too much coffee. His mug has seen even better days. He keeps, framed on the wall of his home office, a photograph of Adrian Colt. Not as a reminder of the case. Not as a trophy. As a reminder of something simpler. That the people who move through the dark, doing the quiet work of making the world safer, deserve to be remembered. Deserve to be seen. And Clara Miller? She went back to school. Studied law. Graduated 3 years later at the top of her class. She now works as an advocate for victims of digital harassment and technology-facilitated abuse. She has testified before 2 state legislatures. She has helped change laws. Sophie is 9 years old. She loves soccer and drawing and a slightly battered stuffed rabbit. She doesn't know all of it yet. The full story. The weight of it. But she knows that her mother is brave. And that will be enough. For now, there is something that stays with me about this story. Something beyond the dark web and the cryptocurrency trails and the clever, terrible planning of a man who believed he was untouchable. It is this. Every link in the chain that brought Patrick Miller to justice began with a woman doing laundry. Finding a piece of paper in a jacket pocket. Not throwing it away. Just keeping it. Because something in her, some quiet, persistent instinct, said, "This matters. Save this. You don't know why yet. But save this." The dark web is vast. Its architecture is deliberately designed to make people feel small, anonymous, powerless. Like whatever happens there is beyond the reach of ordinary people and ordinary law. But ordinary people are not powerless. Clara Miller kept a piece of paper. Marlo Kane read a newsletter. Adrian Colt documented everything. The dark web had its secrets. And one by one, they were brought into the light. That's the story, and what a story it is. Thank you for spending this time with us here at StoryLabs, where every story we tell is a reminder that the truth, no matter how deeply it is buried, no matter how many layers of encryption and darkness are stacked on top of it, has a way of finding the surface. If this story moved you, if it unsettled you, if it made you think about the invisible worlds operating just beneath the surface of the ordinary life you live every day, then it did exactly what it was supposed to do. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. We'll see you in the next story. This was StoryLabs.